Hello, my name is Maria Rodriguez, and today I want to share with you an extraordinary experience that completely transformed my understanding of faith and divine intervention. This story begins during one of the darkest periods of my life, when I was working as a marine biologist in San Diego, California, completely disconnected from any spiritual practice or belief system. I had built my entire identity around science, research, and what I considered to be rational thinking. At that time, I was 34 years old, recently divorced, and struggling to balance my demanding career with raising my 3 children as a single mother. My days were consumed with oceanographic research, analyzing water samples, and studying marine ecosystems that were rapidly deteriorating due to climate change. The weight of witnessing environmental destruction day after day, combined with the personal challenges of my failed marriage and financial struggles, had left me in a state of profound despair. I remember feeling completely alone in the universe, questioning whether life had any deeper meaning beyond the scientific data I collected and the reports I submitted to government agencies that seemed to ignore our environmental warnings. It was during this period of intense spiritual emptiness that something unprecedented happened. I was working late in my laboratory on a Tuesday evening in March, around 8:30 in the evening, when I suddenly heard what I can only describe as the most beautiful, melodic voice I had ever encountered. The voice was unmistakably feminine, gentle yet powerful, and it seemed to fill every corner of the sterile laboratory space. The voice said, clearly and distinctly, "Daughter, you must prepare the hearts of the people." I immediately stopped what I was doing and looked around the empty laboratory, certain that someone had entered without my notice. But I was completely alone. The experience was so vivid and unexpected that I initially convinced myself it was simply exhaustion or stress-induced auditory hallucination. After all, I had been working 16-hour days for weeks, surviving on coffee and very little sleep. I tried to rationalize what had happened, telling myself that my overworked mind was simply playing tricks on me. However, the voice returned the following evening at exactly the same time, with the same message: "Daughter, you must prepare the hearts of the people." This time, the voice was accompanied by an overwhelming sense of peace and love that I had never experienced before in my entire life. For the next 12 consecutive nights, at precisely 8:30 in the evening, regardless of where I was or what I was doing, I would hear this extraordinary voice delivering the same message. Whether I was at home helping my children with homework, driving on the freeway, or even in the middle of important meetings with colleagues, the voice would reach me with perfect clarity. What made this experience even more remarkable was that nobody else around me ever seemed to hear anything unusual, yet for me, the voice was as clear as if someone were standing directly beside me speaking into my ear. As a scientist trained to question and analyze everything, I began documenting these encounters with meticulous detail. I recorded the exact times, my physical location, my emotional state, and any environmental factors that might explain what was happening. I even consulted with medical professionals, wondering if I might be experiencing some form of neurological condition. However, all my medical tests came back completely normal, and my cognitive function remained sharp and unimpaired in every other aspect of my life. The turning point came on the 13th night, when the voice spoke to me with additional information that would change everything. Instead of the familiar message about preparing hearts, the voice said, "I am the Lady of the Rosary, and I come to warn you of what is approaching Phoenix." Now, I had grown up in a nominally Catholic household, but I had abandoned religious practice entirely during my university years, viewing it as incompatible with scientific thinking. However, something deep within my soul recognized this reference, and I felt an overwhelming compulsion to learn more about who this Lady of the Rosary might be. That night, I did something I hadn't done in over 15 years. I searched for information about Catholic apparitions and Marian visitations. What I discovered absolutely astounded me. The Lady of the Rosary was a title associated with Our Lady of Fatima, and the more I read about the Fatima apparitions in Portugal, the more I began to understand that what was happening to me bore striking similarities to those historical events. The emphasis on prayer, preparation, and warnings about future events seemed to align perfectly with my own experiences. The following evening, as I waited with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, the voice came again, but this time the encounter was completely different. Instead of simply hearing the voice, I found myself experiencing what I can only describe as a supernatural vision. My laboratory surroundings completely disappeared, and I found myself standing in what appeared to be a vast desert landscape under an intensely bright sky. In front of me stood a figure of indescribable beauty and radiance, wearing flowing white robes and surrounded by a light that seemed to emanate from within her being. This figure, whom I immediately understood to be Our Lady of Fatima, spoke to me with the same gentle voice I had been hearing for nearly 2 weeks. She explained that she had chosen me, despite my lack of traditional faith, to receive an important message about events that would soon unfold in Phoenix, Arizona. She told me that a great trial was approaching that city, something that would test the faith and resilience of countless people, and that I was being called to help prepare them spiritually for what was coming. The vision continued with Our Lady showing me scenes of Phoenix as I had never seen it before. I witnessed the city from an aerial perspective, its sprawling urban landscape stretching across the desert valley, with millions of people going about their daily lives completely unaware of the approaching crisis. Then the scene shifted, and I saw what appeared to be a massive natural disaster, though the specific details remained unclear. What was crystal clear, however, was the immense suffering and confusion that would follow, and the desperate need for spiritual comfort and guidance that would arise among the population. When the vision ended, I found myself back in my laboratory. But everything had changed. The sterile, scientific environment that had been my refuge now felt completely different, as if it had been blessed by a divine presence. Our Lady of Fatima had given me specific instructions. I was to begin a novena of prayer, starting immediately, and I was to prepare myself to travel to Phoenix within 47 days. She also told me that I would receive additional revelations during this period of preparation, and that I must document everything carefully because these messages would eventually need to be shared with others. As someone who had spent years studying marine ecosystems and environmental patterns, I was accustomed to observing and recording data with scientific precision. However, applying this same methodical approach to supernatural experiences felt surreal and challenging. Nevertheless, I began keeping a detailed spiritual journal, recording not only what Our Lady communicated to me, but also the profound changes I was experiencing in my own heart and mind. The anger and despair that had consumed me for months began to dissolve, replaced by an inexplicable sense of purpose and inner peace. The novena that Our Lady had requested proved to be transformative in ways I could never have anticipated. Each evening, as I knelt in prayer with a rosary I had purchased from a local Catholic gift shop, I experienced deeper spiritual encounters that gradually revealed more details about the mission I was being called to undertake. During the third night of prayer, Our Lady appeared to me again, this time in my own bedroom, surrounded by the same brilliant light I had witnessed in the laboratory vision. She spoke to me about the power of intercessory prayer and explained that the approaching trial in Phoenix was not meant as punishment, but rather as an opportunity for spiritual awakening and conversion. Our Lady revealed that Phoenix had been chosen specifically because it represented the modern American condition: rapid growth, material prosperity, technological advancement, but also spiritual emptiness and disconnection from divine truth. She explained that many people in that city were living lives of quiet desperation, pursuing success and comfort while their souls remained hungry for authentic meaning and purpose. The coming crisis would strip away the illusions and false securities that prevented people from seeking genuine relationship with the divine. During the 7th night of the novena, I received the most detailed and disturbing vision yet. Our Lady showed me a massive dust storm, unlike anything ever recorded in Arizona's meteorological history, that would engulf the entire Phoenix metropolitan area for several days. This supernatural storm would be accompanied by unprecedented electrical phenomena, power outages, and communication disruptions that would leave millions of people isolated and afraid. However, she emphasized that this apparent catastrophe would actually serve as a catalyst for the greatest spiritual revival in American history, as people would be forced to turn away from their technological dependencies and rediscover the power of prayer and community. What struck me most profoundly about these revelations was Our Lady's emphasis on mercy rather than judgment. She repeatedly stressed that this event was not about divine wrath or punishment for sin, but rather about divine love seeking to draw people back into relationship with their Creator. She explained that in the darkness and confusion of the coming storm, many hearts would be open to receive grace and truth that they had previously rejected or ignored. My role, she revealed, would be to serve as a beacon of hope and faith during this critical period, helping people understand the spiritual significance of what they were experiencing. As the 47-day preparation period continued, I began experiencing other forms of mystical phenomena that further confirmed the authenticity of these divine encounters. I developed what I can only describe as prophetic dreams, where I would see specific individuals in Phoenix who would play important roles in the spiritual awakening that would follow the storm. I saw priests and ministers who would emerge as powerful leaders, ordinary lay people who would demonstrate extraordinary courage and compassion, and even former skeptics like myself who would become passionate evangelists for faith and conversion. Point 1. Of the most remarkable aspects of this preparation period was how Our Lady began preparing me practically for the mission ahead. Despite my scientific background, I had never been particularly gifted in public speaking or religious instruction. However, during my daily prayer times, I began receiving what I can only describe as supernatural downloads of theological knowledge and spiritual wisdom. Complex doctrines and biblical truths that I had never studied suddenly became clear and comprehensible to me, as if they were being written directly onto my heart and mind by divine intervention. Our Lady also began preparing me emotionally for the challenges I would face. She warned me that many people would initially reject my message, dismissing me as delusional or attention-seeking. She explained that this skepticism was natural and even necessary, as it would separate those who were genuinely seeking truth from those who were merely curious about supernatural phenomena. She assured me that I would be given the grace to persevere through criticism and rejection, and that eventually, the events themselves would vindicate the warnings I had been commissioned to deliver. By the 40th day of preparation, I had made all the necessary arrangements to travel to Phoenix. I had taken a leave of absence from my research position, arranged for my children to stay with my sister in Los Angeles, and begun reaching out to Catholic parishes in the Phoenix area to see if any priests would be willing to listen to my story. Most of the initial responses were polite but skeptical, which was exactly what Our Lady had predicted would happen. However, she had assured me that the right doors would open at the right time, and that I should not be discouraged by initial rejections. On the 47th day, exactly as Our Lady had instructed, I arrived in Phoenix during the intense heat of late August. The temperature was reaching 118 degrees Fahrenheit, and the entire city seemed to shimmer under the relentless desert sun. I had booked a modest hotel room near downtown, and my plan was to spend several days visiting different parishes and trying to connect with clergy who might be open to hearing about the supernatural revelations I had received. What I didn't expect was how quickly everything would begin to unfold once I arrived in the city. On my very first evening in Phoenix, while I was attending Mass at St. Mary's Basilica, something extraordinary happened during the consecration. As the priest elevated the Eucharist, I suddenly saw Our Lady of Fatima standing directly behind the altar, visible only to me among the hundreds of people present in the church. She was more radiant than ever before, and she communicated to me telepathically that the promised events would begin within 72 hours. She also revealed that the priest celebrating this particular Mass, Father Michael O'Connor, would become my most important ally in the mission that lay ahead. After the service ended, I approached Father O'Connor with tremendous nervousness and uncertainty. How do you tell a complete stranger that the Mother of God has been appearing to you and that a supernatural crisis is about to befall his city? I had rehearsed various ways to introduce myself and explain my situation, but when I actually stood before this elderly Irish priest with kind eyes and a gentle smile, all my prepared speeches seemed inadequate. Instead, I simply said, "Father, I believe Our Lady of Fatima has sent me here to warn you about something that's going to happen to Phoenix very soon." To my amazement, Father O'Connor didn't dismiss me or suggest that I needed psychological help. Instead, he invited me to his rectory for coffee and listened intently as I shared my entire story, from the first voice I heard in my laboratory to the detailed visions of the approaching supernatural storm. When I finished speaking, he was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing everything I had told him. Finally, he revealed something that made my heart race with excitement and confirmation. He had been having recurring dreams about a great spiritual awakening coming to Phoenix, and he had been praying for months that God would send someone to help him understand what these dreams meant. Father O'Connor became my first believer and advocate in Phoenix. Over the next 2 days, he introduced Me to a small prayer group of about 15 parishioners who met weekly to pray for spiritual revival in their city. These were ordinary people: a retired nurse named Dorothy, a construction worker named Carlos, a young mother named Jennifer, and several others, who had been sensing that something significant was approaching their community. When I shared my story with this group, there was an immediate recognition and acceptance that filled me with profound gratitude and relief. On the third morning after my arrival in Phoenix, I was awakened at exactly 5:30 by an overwhelming sense of urgency. Our Lady appeared to me in my hotel room and told me that this was the day everything would begin. She instructed me to gather Father O'Connor and the prayer group at St. Mary's Basilica by noon, because they would need to be in a place of consecrated worship when the supernatural events commenced. She also revealed that the storm would last exactly 96 hours, and that during this time, I would receive additional revelations that would guide the spiritual response to the crisis. I immediately called Father O'Connor, and despite the early hour, he answered his phone as if he had been expecting my call. When I told him what Our Lady had communicated, he said he had been unable to sleep all night because he felt such a strong spiritual urgency. He had already begun calling the members of our prayer group, and they were all reporting similar feelings of anticipation and spiritual alertness. By 11:30 that morning, we were all gathered in the basilica, praying the rosary and waiting for whatever God had planned. At exactly 12:15 in the afternoon, while we were in the middle of the joyful mysteries, the sky outside began to change in a way that defied all meteorological explanation. The bright desert sun was suddenly obscured by clouds that seemed to appear from nowhere, and these clouds began forming spiraling patterns that looked almost like a massive celestial rose. The temperature, which had been scorching just minutes before, began dropping dramatically, and an unusual wind started blowing from all directions simultaneously. Within 30 minutes, what had started as mysterious cloud formations had developed into the most extraordinary atmospheric phenomenon any of us had ever witnessed. The sky turned a deep bronze color, and the spiraling clouds began producing electrical discharges unlike anything in recorded weather history. These weren't ordinary lightning bolts, but rather streams of light that moved in slow, deliberate patterns across the sky, creating geometric designs that seemed almost like divine calligraphy written in electricity. As the supernatural storm intensified, all electronic devices throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area began malfunctioning. Cell phones, radios, televisions, and even car ignitions stopped working, leaving the entire population of over 5 million people completely cut off from their normal means of communication and transportation. The city that had been bustling with activity just hours before was suddenly plunged into an eerie silence, broken only by the otherworldly sounds of the electrical phenomena dancing across the bronze-colored sky. Our prayer group remained in the basilica throughout the first day of the storm, taking turns leading the rosary and other prayers while I continued receiving revelations from Our Lady about what was happening and what we should expect in the days ahead. She explained that this supernatural isolation was necessary to break people's dependence on technology and material distractions, forcing them to confront the deeper questions of existence and meaning that they had been avoiding. She also revealed that many people throughout the city were already beginning to pray who had not prayed in years or even decades. On the second day of the storm, something beautiful began happening. Despite the lack of electronic communication, people started finding their way to churches throughout Phoenix. Word spread through neighborhoods, by foot and bicycle, that the basilica had become a center of prayer and spiritual support. By the afternoon, we had over 300 people gathered in the church, representing every age, ethnicity, and background. Many of them shared stories of profound spiritual experiences they were having during the storm, from healing visions to encounters with deceased relatives who were encouraging them to embrace faith. Father O'Connor emerged as a powerful spiritual leader during this crisis, delivering impromptu sermons and leading group prayers with an authority and charisma that seemed to be supernaturally enhanced. Dorothy, the retired nurse, organized medical care for people who needed attention, while Carlos and other men in the group handled security and logistics. Jennifer, the young mother, started a children's program that kept the youngest members of our growing community calm and engaged. It was as if Our Lady was orchestrating every detail of our response to create the most effective possible ministry during this unprecedented situation. But on the third day of the supernatural storm, Our Lady appeared to me with the most significant revelation yet. She showed me that what was happening in Phoenix was just the beginning of a much larger spiritual awakening that would spread across the entire United States over the following 18 months. She revealed that similar supernatural events would occur in 8 other major American cities, each one designed to reach different demographics and cultural groups with the message of divine love and the urgent need for spiritual conversion. Phoenix had been chosen as the first location because of its rapid growth and diverse population, making it an ideal testing ground for the evangelization strategies that would later be implemented in other cities. During this third vision, Our Lady also revealed the deeper theological significance of the bronze-colored sky and the geometric electrical patterns we had been witnessing. She explained that the bronze color represented purification through trial, similar to how bronze is refined through intense heat, and that the electrical patterns were actually visible representations of prayers ascending to heaven and divine grace descending to earth. Every time someone in the city prayed during the storm, it contributed to the magnificent light display that everyone could see, creating a tangible connection between individual faith and cosmic spiritual activity. As the fourth and final day of the storm approached, Our Lady prepared me for what she called the Great Revelation. She explained that on this day, she would appear visibly to everyone gathered at the basilica, not just to me, and that this public apparition would serve as the culminating miracle that would convince even the most skeptical observers of the divine origin of recent events. She also warned me that this would be my final direct communication with her during this mission, and that afterward, I would need to rely on the Holy Spirit and the community of believers that had formed around these extraordinary experiences. The fourth day began with an atmosphere of intense spiritual anticipation. Word had somehow spread throughout the city that something significant was going to happen at St. Mary's Basilica, and by sunrise, we had over 1,500 people gathered in and around the church. The crowd included Catholics, Protestants, people of other faiths, and even many who claimed no religious beliefs at all but were drawn by curiosity about the supernatural phenomena they had been experiencing. The diversity of this gathering was remarkable. Business executives stood alongside homeless individuals, elderly grandmothers prayed next to teenagers with multiple tattoos and piercings, and people of every ethnicity and social class came together in a way that seemed to transcend all normal social boundaries. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the bronze-colored sky suddenly began to clear, and the electrical displays that had been continuous for 96 hours came to an abrupt stop. For several minutes, the entire city was enveloped in a profound silence that felt almost sacred, as if all of creation was holding its breath in anticipation of something momentous. Then, just as Our Lady had promised, she appeared above the basilica in a blaze of glory that was visible to every single person present, believers and skeptics alike. The apparition was unlike anything described in historical accounts of Marian visitations. Our Lady appeared as a towering figure of light, easily 50 feet tall, wearing robes that seemed to be woven from pure radiance and surrounded by what appeared to be thousands of angels singing in harmonious chorus. Her voice, when she spoke, was audible to everyone regardless of their position in the massive crowd, and her words carried an authority and power that left no doubt about their divine origin. She delivered a message of hope and urgency, calling all Americans to return to God and warning that the spiritual crisis facing the nation was far more serious than the economic or political challenges that dominated public discourse. Our lattice public message lasted exactly 17 minutes, during which she outlined a specific program of national spiritual renewal that included increased prayer, fasting, charitable works, and evangelization. She announced that special graces would be available to anyone who committed themselves to this spiritual program, and she promised that America could experience a golden age of faith and prosperity if enough people responded to her call. However, she also warned that continued rejection of divine mercy would lead to increasingly severe chastisements that would affect every aspect of American society. When the apparition ended, the transformation in the crowd was immediate and dramatic. Hundreds of people fell to their knees in spontaneous conversion, many weeping with joy and relief as they experienced what they later described as the most profound spiritual awakening of their lives. Former atheists began praying the rosary, estranged family members embraced in forgiveness, and people who had been carrying grudges for years found themselves filled with supernatural peace and the ability to forgive their enemies. In the days and weeks that followed, Phoenix became a pilgrimage destination for people from across the United States and even internationally. The basilica where Our Lady had appeared became known as the Shrine of the Bronze Sky, and countless miracles of healing, conversion, and spiritual transformation were reported by visitors. Father O'Connor was appointed by the bishop to oversee the investigation of these supernatural claims, and after 18 months of careful study, the Church officially recognized the authenticity of the Phoenix apparitions and approved devotional practices associated with Our Lady of Fatima's messages. For me, my life was forever changed by these experiences. I never returned to my career as a marine biologist, instead dedicating myself full-time to sharing the message of Phoenix and helping coordinate the spiritual renewal movement that spread across America just as Our Lady had predicted. My 3 children, who had initially been confused and somewhat embarrassed by their mother's sudden religious transformation, gradually came to understand the significance of what had happened and eventually became powerful advocates for the Fatima message. In their own right today. 5 years after the supernatural storm that changed Phoenix forever, I continue to travel throughout the United States, sharing this testimony and encouraging people to embrace the spiritual program that Our Lady outlined during her public apparition. The response has been extraordinary, with millions of Americans participating in prayer groups, pilgrimages, and charitable works inspired by the Phoenix revelations. While not everyone believes in the supernatural origin of these events, even skeptics acknowledge that the social and spiritual transformation that followed has had overwhelmingly positive effects on communities across the nation. My friends, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to listen to this incredible testimony of Our Lady of Fatima's intervention in our modern world. If this story has touched your heart or opened your eyes to the reality of divine love and mercy, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel so you can continue receiving messages of hope and faith that will strengthen your spiritual journey. Your subscription truly makes a difference in helping us reach more people with these life-changing testimonies. I am deeply curious to know how this story has affected you personally. Please take a moment to share in the comments below which part of Maria's experience resonated most strongly with your own spiritual journey. Was it the initial calling she received while working in her laboratory? The powerful visions of the approaching storm? The incredible community that formed during the crisis? Or perhaps the public apparition that changed so many lives forever? Your insights and reflections help create a beautiful community of faith right here in our comment section. I also want to extend a special invitation for you to share your own testimonies with our community. Have you experienced divine intervention in your life? Perhaps a miraculous healing, a powerful conversion experience, or a moment when you felt called to a deeper spiritual life? Whether your story involves apparitions like Maria's or simply a quiet moment of grace that changed everything, we would be honored to hear about it. You can share these experiences in the comments, and who knows? Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to strengthen their own faith journey. Finally, I want to encourage you to reflect on what you've learned from Maria's incredible story and how it might apply to your own spiritual life. What is Our Lady of Fatima calling you to do in your own community? How might you prepare your heart for deeper encounters with divine love? What steps could you take today to become more open to supernatural grace and intervention in your daily life? Please share your thoughts and commitments in the comments section, because when we declare our intentions publicly, it helps us stay accountable to the spiritual growth we desire. Remember, every story of faith shared, every prayer offered, and every act of love performed contributes to the great spiritual awakening that Our Lady promised would transform our nation. Thank you for being part of this incredible journey of faith, and may Our Lady of Fatima intercede for each of you and your families. God bless you all.